Welcome to another edition of Consensus Unreality. Ben,
A podcast.
a podcast concerning occult and paranormal, esoteric subjects, and more. We were just talking about harsh noise and Ben's affinity for aughts Chicago emo music. Uh,
Well, yeah.
uh, yeah, subscribe to our Patreon for just $5 a month, and that's where we do most of our episodes. We just are in the midst of a very exciting series for us called Pulp Magic, where we are exploring 20th century occultism and its connections to exotica and pulp fiction. Really enjoying this one. We just did a massive deep dive on theosophy and
Yeah.
its
That was a lot of
roots
fun.
in 20th century occultism and also politics, the forming of the New Age movement, and a one world government.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
kind of.
head on over
I don't know.
to Patreon if you want to, get involved in this odd little journey we're on, mapping these connections. It's the only place to hear it. But for now, enjoy this interview.
Yep, and we also have our printed journal of shells over there. Full archive, all of our exclusive episodes, which we do regularly. Our public interviews and episodes are a little bit more sparse. So if you're missing listening to us on the regular, check out patreon.com/consensusunreality to unlock all of that extra good stuff, and get access to all of our regular content. Thanks for listening and enjoy the interview.
Welcome to another episode of Consensus Unreality. Today, we are pleased to have Laetitia Barbier on the show. Laetitia is a tarot scholar and cartomancer in practice, the author of the book Tarot and Divination Cards, a visual archive. And we've never had a tarot episode before, which is a kind of a crazy oversight or just something that it just never came to be. I think we've talked about it, but I can't think of a better person to have on to introduce the cards to Consensus Unreality. So yeah, welcome to the show.
You're welcome. I'm super excited to be here.
Awesome. I guess I kind of wanted to start with the beginning, which was what was it about tarot initially that kind of attracted or inspired you, as opposed to other, everything else in the world?
Well, yeah, I have so it's a story I told a couple of times, but it's a weird story, so I'll try to make it short and sweet. I'm French, as you probably heard. I have an accent. I've been living in the U.S. for like 13 years, I think. But I was raised in France, and in France there is a huge culture of cartomancy and tarot. People read cards, And so when I was a kid, I was about 6 year old. I was in the kindergarten, and my mom will drive me back from home around 4 p.m. And at 4 p.m. in the car, we'd put a radio show. And the radio show was this astrologer slash cartomancer named Didier Derlich, who was reading Tarot de Marseille on the radio. So people will call the station, and he will just read the cards to the people live. And because it was on the radio, he had to describe the cards. So, like on a regular, I want to know if my husband is going to come back. Okay, well, you have the hangman, you have the empress reversed, you have, like the justice, probably. And somebody was describing some of the iconography, and I was 6. I didn't know how to read books at that point. I was a grown-up baby. But I remember imagining the cards. Like it was my favorite show because those pictures existed in my head, and I could see the empress, and I could see what she was holding, and the hangman. I was just, it was also sometimes very graphic stuff, and it's just like those images that were very alive in my head, in my imagination. And then later, my mom stopped driving me to school, and I was able to take the bus with my friend at the age of 11, like a cool girl. And we would pass by the center of my hometown, and you had every day would pass in front of this tobacconist that had, pipes and cigars and cigarettes, but also games, backgammon, chess sets, and playing card. And then one day in the window, I remember there was this like, cards box, and I saw the box from, like a little afar, and I was like, this is interesting. And I went in the window, and it was the card. It was the on the cover you had the full le mat, so the more playful, and I was like, those are the card that the man was reading on the radio. And so I think I asked them to my mom for my birthday or something as a gift, and it kind of kickstarted my interest in the cards around that time. And so I started to read cards, for fun. I was terrible at it, I'm not gonna lie. I was giving recess, like love reading during recess with the Marseille deck. And the tradition is slightly different in France because like at that point we were a lot of in France, a lot of people only read with the major arcana. So, like all the Marseille pip card are too abstract to be read sometimes. So, but it was very convoluted, and so I was not very good at it. But I was really passionate, and I started to be very interested in all sorts of other divination systems. I subscribed to that magazine called Tarot and Astrology, like you do when you were 12, and there was like you had like the number one, you had like one card from a deck. Number two, you had a pendulum that you pull experiments. The third time you had the ESP cards. And so like the idea was that you had articles, and then every week they will give you like some new tool to kind of like move in those liminal spaces. And so yeah, that's how I started. And then tarot was really part of my very, very private spiritual practice. It's something that I was not necessarily sharing with people. When I was in my 20s, I lived with I lived in Paris, and my roommate was British, so she had a Rider-Waite-Smith, and was very intrigued by her deck. So every Sunday would meet in her bedroom, and we'll just read cards to each other. And it was her way to unwind and kind of play with the cards. So I was reading with my Marseille, but I was kind of, your deck is really cool. I like that. I want to have figurative images on my minor arcanas. I want to, I fell in love really with Pamela Coleman Smith's images. And so I ended up buying myself a Rider-Waite-Smith. And same thing for many years. Didn't really, used it on and off. Sometimes I didn't use it for years at all. A good friend of mine used to give us a reading, when I was in Brooklyn, I would go and see my friend for reading from time to time. And then it was just a very strange story, I went to see a medium in Lilydale in 2016, 2017 or 2016, I can't remember. And the medium, I can, Lauren Thibodeau, I can cite her name if she listens to this. I'm very grateful. She told me, Letty, do you read cards? And I said, yeah, actually I do. And she's like, well, I think you should read cards. It should be your job. And I'm like, are you sure? And then she told me all those details about channeling through automatic writing. And so I left the reading room, and then I went back to my friends, and I remember my friends were like, oh, Letty, that will be so great. You have the look. She's like, you have the look, Letty. I was just like, yeah, whatever. And so I rolled my eyes very hard. And then about 6 to 8 months later, my friend gifted me a tarot reading with her stepmom, who was a tarot reader, like from the Aquarius age. We started in California in the 70s. And it was just this thing where my friend had this stepmom who read cards, and we didn't know about it, but it suddenly just appeared, boofed in. And I remember I recorded the reading, because I I do that. And at some point during the reading, she told me, Letty, you should be doing the work I'm doing. Do you read cards? And I said, like, yeah, actually I do. Like, she's like, and so she continued to speak. And then she told me the exact same thing that the medium told me. Like she told me about some writing, journaling, automatic writing or free writing. And it was just like like I was really impressed by that reading. And the fact that, like once I didn't really took that seriously because, and then second time, it seems that, spirits really wanted me to do that to catch up. And, I'm like, it's very interesting because I'm good at a lot of things, but I'm also, I'm an okay writer and I'm an okay, maybe photographer, but I never pretended to be an artist. And I'm kind of like a jack of all trade, but I'm never good at anything. And that's just the only thing I was, it's just the going back to that professionally felt like retrieving a mother tongue that I had forgotten. And so it was not like I had to relearn everything. It's just like, so suddenly I just read cards and I never felt, it was that thing I knew how to do. And I feel like that's the only thing I'm really good at. And for all sorts of reasons, it's just, it was not my plan, but it became, my reality. And I'm very grateful for it.
Mm.
That's great. Yeah, I love the way that you were like guided almost by, I guess by psychics, but if you look at it literally, but maybe also by some sort of magnetic spiritual force. I both can relate to that and also like think that that's very perfect for someone who's also working with, ostensibly channeling that sort of force back for other people too. It feels almost not ironic, but maybe kind of karmic to like then play that role for other people.
Yeah, and there is this thing too, is like I know it. I think I always wanted to do that. For me, there is so many layers in this. And I've always had friends that had marginal, not necessarily spiritually, but like in places. How can I say this? I don't want to pull weird words, but people who exist according to certain system of their own, same like ambiguous system of values, etc. And I've always had friends who had some kind of foot into a spirituality of their own making, and like when we were young, it was not necessarily something. It was always very private, but I think I've always seek the company of those people because there is something that I felt, like I couldn't admit it for myself. And it's true. Like now, I remember reading in a journal, maybe like, I don't know, like maybe 10 years ago, like I was doing this like kind of journaling exercise. And it's like, oh, put 3 career choices that you'd like to do, astronaut, pizza maker, whatever. And I remember writing tarot reader, and I discovered that after becoming one. But like I feel like it's always been something that I wanted because it's like the 2 things I love the most. I was talking about that a little bit earlier. Like I think I believe that although I present as an extrovert, I'm like totally socially awkward, and so like being in this space like with people directly and playing with a set of images that are just never-endingly inspiring to me, like playing art with them, reading through different layers of, I don't know what it is, energy, realities. I realized that it was my favorite place to be. So I'm lucky to be able to do that every day.
Yeah, that's great. I noticed like when you were talking about how you first were exposed to it through the radio, I thought that was super interesting because um and then you focus so much on the visual language of the cards as well. And so to have it like described audio, what's the word for that? Like
Like synesthesia kind of, yeah.
it was sonically described to you, and then So you kind of what, yeah, I just think that's so interesting how how that's how you kind of first came to them. And maybe is it more powerful because it kind of like was,
I don't, like I don't know, like the only thing I
yeah,
know is my experience, but I know that the having those images exist inside me with according to my own
right.
imagination was something that I thought about for a long time after. And I have a there is a something we can talk about this later. It's like there is this historic thing that I found very interesting where historically Great Britain didn't play Marseille, Tarot de Marseille. That's a game that was not played in Great Britain. And so um in the 19th century, one of the people that really reestablished tarot as like the esoteric tool that contained all the other tradition is Eliphas Levi,
Mm.
and he wrote that
Yeah.
like Ritual and Dogma of High Magic, and that book was translated. I don't know if it was translated word by word, but I know that Arthur Waite did a digest of it at some point. And
Yeah.
in the Dogma of High Magic, you only have two images that are related to the tarot. You have the Baphomet, that is, that he drew himself. That those are the drawing from Eliphas Levi. And you have the Chariot, which for the first time is featured with two sphinxes and not two horses.
Mm.
And so those are the two images that are featured in the book. And the rest, the cards are described verbally. And so there is, I remember finding, I can't remember who has them. They are in a museum somewhere in England. But like what's his name? So Eliphas Levi's book was, like I'm not saying that, like it was really, really important for the development of like the French occult revival, but also partly of certain aspects of the Golden Dawn. And there is this incredible drawing by I think it was Westcott, who was one of the founder of the Golden Dawn, who actually tried to recreate those images, but he didn't know they are not necessarily the tarot is not really evoked as a game in the book. They are evoked as the book of Thoth and the iconography of Thoth. So he created those images out of the description that Eliphas Levi did. And so apart from the devil and the chariot that are kind of looking like the drawing from Levi, those drawings, they're completely different from the actual representation of the card that exists in the game, because they were made from like a written description. And those drawings, they're pretty great because they're someone's personal interpretation. They had, so I'm not saying that my experience was close to Westcott, but in a way it's like this thing of where language translates into images. And that's really a fascinating example, I think, in history where,
Yeah.
images, we want to create them and we want to see them from the inside out,
Mm. And so much of that gets applied to masonry too, through Albert Pike directly, right? Like a lot of Levy's stuff ends up in Morals and Dogma, and
What's the yeah, I'm not, I'm not really familiar with British masonry, I'm going to be honest.
yeah, yeah.
I don't know much, but there is one of the thing that like the friend of one the dad of one of my friend was an artist and a mason, and I remember having endless conversation. It was French, so it was like a different
Mm.
different Masonic sensibility, and it was interesting because he was like he was living in a rural area, so he had one lodge in the center of France, and there were very few artists in the Mason. That's what he was telling me, and but we used to talk about that, talking about the well the like the power, the power of this deciphering images or images that are, and like one of the things that we used to do, which was so insane, and I used to go with him and his son, who I was dating at the time, to the flea market. It's like it was in the center of France. So imagine, like a field with like a bunch of tables, people, basically emptying and so we will just pick up objects. And I remember like I bought one of those. It was like like a wall sconce in which you can put holy water in, but it's this angel holding a shell. And maybe I can send you a picture of it later for the Patreon.
Yeah.
And you will just take the objects from the table of the flea market. It's like this 19th century object, and you will just read it for us. See, this is the feminine principle, and like you see how the robe of the angel looks like a vulva, which is true, and it's, and then you have the snake coiling under it, and it's like a masculine person. And he used to do that stuff like it wasn't, mad, like you will just see a very rustic closet. And he was telling me, count, you see, like as a decoration, you have all this little dent, as a motif. Count how many of them there is. And there was 33 of them. Of course, 33.
Yeah.
And it was basically almost like, like some kind of mystical Googling.
Yeah.
It's like to read the world, to read the symbolic cipher implanted in those objects that were intentionally maybe or unintentionally, but through a world of unspoken tradition, and it was just so amazing. You let us visit this garden, and then you had like a lion, which was the place was so crazy. But you had bushes that were put between, the separation was the golden number, and then you had all this like energetic power line that he was showing us, basically showing you see like here there's some kind of energetic meridian, because those plants, they're not growing, and you can see basically you could see the branches of all the trees kind of bowing to that special power line. So I mean, I'm really fascinated by that. My gift, so to speak, is very limited. I'm not a medium, I'm not a clairaudient, I'm not a clairvoyant, but like I have this way of being able to see through images, and I can see stratas of history of the person, of other stuff sometimes, and it's also very linked to language, like this image and language, the voice that I hear. I don't hear the voices of the card like if they were people, but I can hear their language and the way of speech they have, and their wit or plain brutal honesty sometimes. And so that there is a lot of connection between the idea of voices, language, and the iconography of the card.
Yeah, and when I hear you say that, I think of what little I know about the Kabbalah. Like it does remind me of that Kabbalistic connection of like the realm of like creative manifestation and intention being imbued in objects and that kind of reading of the world. But what do you kind of make about the Kabbalistic connections of tarot and those implications that are, is that kind of like a later thing that's, does that begin with Eliphas Levi?
So I think, this idea of the Kabbalah, one of the thing that we owe Eliphas Levi is a system that actually works, in which everything from alchemy, Western Kabbalah kind of can be pigeonholed into the different, he basically created this system, this correspondence system between different layers of magical tradition that actually works. It made sense. And personally, this is not I don't read the Kabbalah. I'm not, I'm not, I don't know Hebrew. This is not the way I work with a card. One of the things that I understand, because I'm interested in the history of the card, is that, then I read Levi, I read, Coeur de Gabelin, all those people that basically, and maybe it's a big word, but invented what the esoteric tarot is. And I like to imagine I have, like both, one eye for each, one eye that it really is, like the eye of an historian that enjoy. I mean, I'm not a tarot historian, but I have a very strong connection to history, and my background is in art history. So I enjoy understanding the cultural context in which art and some practice emerge, but also and trying to understand like how different, I like to understand the fabric of history, how it weaves itself together. And And so when you read, like the esoteric tarot, like one of the main understanding of it is that it's really an 18th century thing. This guy, Antoine Coeur de Gabelin, writes a book, which is a really fascinating book. It's a huge encyclopedia. It speaks about, you have article on language, etymology, folklore from different areas, the meaning of names, so like and it's 18th century. So like some of those discipline, like are not necessarily, they don't have names, and they are not, like they're a little rough on the edges, it's the rational, like systems are not necessarily put in place. So there is a lot of, I'd say, poetic license, but he was a really interesting guy. And basically he was a Protestant, he was a Freemason. And so at that point in France, Freemasonry was really Egyptophile, although the hieroglyph had not been translated. And so that term hieroglyph meant a picture that that signify that is a tunnel of meaning. People had no idea that, they believed at that point that the Egyptian had very sophisticated rites, which they did, but they couldn't understand the hieroglyph. And so Coeur de Gabelin basically, and the text is, super fun, like he has this whole section on games. And so you have like different games. And then he talks in the book. He says like, yeah, one night I was in Paris. I was invited in this salon, and this woman wanted to play a game of cards, and she gave us those cards. And I looked at them, and he said that in the text, like I looked at them for 15 minutes, and in 15 minutes I discovered it was the Book of Thoth. And those cards were actually, like the Egyptian Hermetic knowledge in disguise. And so of course, like that basically has like this kind of nuclear ripple effect. And for 150 years, people are going to believe that tarot comes from Egypt, and that it is, like some kind of the gestalt of the esoteric. It's like all the discipline ever possible crammed in one. But I think that personally, so because, like you have different stratas of occultists kind of contradicting each other, and there is a great deal of imagination going on, not invention. You can call that, you can judge that, but you also don't have to. I tend to not do that. It's not something I work with, and I don't, but it has, historical significance. And for me, understanding how history hinge itself with the tarot, how all those different layers of working with the tarot, some of them are very mathematic, some of them are very, linked to traditions, historical, traditions that were misunderstood. It just, for me, it gives me this understanding that tarot is something that survived because it was some kind of Rorschach test that allowed for people to crystallize a way to work with it. And that's the reason every generation it is reinvented in a way by different people. And that's the reason people feel, like that tradition is still kind of like growing and moving and being, explored by people. So.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah, we kind of, so we've been doing this pulp magic kind of East-West series thing on our Patreon. And so we were going to definitely ask you about that kind of the air of like kind of the East that is kind of given to tarot and its origins. And so you think that's sort of, I mean, you just said it was kind of coming out of that Egyptophilia
right.
in the French occult revival. Do you think that's sort of, I mean, so where would you trace the roots of tarot?
Well, the tarot is, of course, like some people have diverging thoughts, but like the historian that have been, like the consensus is that tarot was invented as a game in the 15th century in northern Italy. That's, like some of the oldest game that we have access to are actually in New York. At the Morgan, you have the Visconti Sforza, you have the Visconti di Modrome in the Beinecker, and you have that's the fun part. In the 50s, you had this badass New York Public Library librarian who started to be interested in the card, and her name is Gertrude Markley, and she wrote a book later on Italian tarots. But like she wrote, like first an essay in like one of those New York Public Library review, and she the article is really interesting. She basically said, okay, so like those cards, like we can access them, like they are accessible. Like the Metropolitan has very old cards too. Like if we read the occultists, they believe that they came from Egypt. But technically the oldest card we have are those Renaissance card. And she doesn't say that this way, but like, and she's like, like, can we trust those guys? Were they historian? It was in the 50s. So at that point, like the protocol of history was really different. You couldn't just like write shit up and say like, oh, like I looked at a deck for 15 minutes and it's like, this is. And so she basically, her work, she basically says, like the oldest card are from 15th century Italy, and the Italian were not Egyptophile, but they were also interested in a lot of other stuff. They were interested in literature. Like around that time, like people, like what's his name? Petrarch was still older age, like the Petrarch's triumph, and they were interested in alchemy, and they were interested in all sorts of stuff, but they were not necessarily very for example, alchemy was not no secret, like the most, like court of northern Italy had like massive collection of alchemical books, and it was no secret to anyone. It was part of a gentleman's education to know about the royal way, and so historians believe that like what's happening is like playing cards arrive in Europe around the 14th century. It's a derivation, that's the main consensus, derivation of a game that was played by the Mamluk, that we call the Mamluk game, which was a set of paper cards with 4 suits, coins, cups, scimitars, curved swords, and polo sticks. And then it had a set of 4, if I remember well, 4 character cards, court cards, that were basically 4 men with different levels of power. But because it was an Arabic game, there were no figures. There was no man on it. So like the court cards have those very beautiful calligraphy, golden calligraphy on them. And so the idea is that through trades, between Venice, Spain, like between the Mediterranean different routes, Europeans were like, oh, those games are cool, we should have some. And then playing cards arrived, and then the Italian were like, we need something weirder. We need something more complicated. And so we're going to invent this other series of cards that will add to the deck, that will have illustration. And like basically, if you look at the Visconti Sforza, the major arcana, they're the same that we use today. You have very little change. The cards are not numbered, but you have like like a world card, which is slightly different. You have a sun card. You have an artisan / magician card, kind of a Bachelor card. So the cards, the iconography is already there, and then through the history of fun and gaming, the game developed and became like used for divination. Potentially in the 18th century. Like we don't really know about, the problem is like nobody wrote about tarot and divination until the 18th century. And the cartomancy, which is reading with playing card, it happened around the same time as well. Like we don't know if those practices were done because nobody wrote about them really. And then in the 18th century, you have this French man, Jean-Baptiste Aliette, who writes a book on cartomancy. And he's like, oh, with you playing card, you can, you can use that for fortune. It's not divination though; it's science. But it's, you can do that. Huh. And he's really fascinating. And same thing, did he witness people reading cards before? Did he kind of get all that knowledge from people that he saw reading cards? Did you get readings? We don't know. We can't know. So everything that happened before 18th century, it really is speculative, everyone
Huh.
wants like tarot to be ancient and cool and sacred and
Right.
by UFOs, like
Yeah.
but the reality is that we don't know. We don't know. We can
Huh.
only with that, paper evidence.
Isn't
Yeah, that's
I
awesome.
heard that one of the earliest accounts of cartomancy is in like the memoir of Casanova?
Yeah, there is a something I remember in the Casanova, there is something like a little poems with like playing cards, and then you have like little, the playing cards have like characters, like they have like personas.
Hmm.
And so you have, but like I remember I went to the Met the other day, and I was there with this great tarot scholar who knows so much more than I do.
Hmm.
Robert was like super fun and also really knowledgeable. And he does that thing like once every couple of months where he brings groups to the print collection of the Metropolitan Museum, and they basically show you the cards they have, some
Hmm.
of the cards. And so this time they showed us this really cool 17th century book that used part of it used playing cards, but most of it was about how to cast lots with dice.
Hmm.
And you had all this like it was in Latin, so like we didn't understand much, but like there was this thing where you threw dice, and then you had those kind of little systems where like if you have the numbers 7, you have this is the little divination line. And I think that there is something this is something that the there is this idea during the Renaissance. There is this idea that people used to use the card as a way to prompt poems or imagination games.
Hmm.
They will pick a card and then like create a little aphorism for it. And so I think that one thing that we also have to understand is the way people understood images was really different, that they had a power that we don't understand so much anymore.
Hmm.
When you look at the Italian building, like in Padua, where you have, the good and bad government, and people were
Yeah.
supposed to, be morally affected and reminded of the importance of their duty as they take decision in that building. And so there is a sophistication that is not necessarily linked to um, like magic in a modern sense, but um, where image are teachers, and like they are living teachers in a way. They are here to kind of like that's the same thing. If you look at the tarot, the tarot has a group of cards that is inspired by the cardinal virtues.
Hmm.
So you have justice, temperance, strength, fortitude, and then the one missing is prudence. Those images, you can find them everywhere, like in the medieval era, you can find them in the Renaissance. And they were this very important system of moral philosophy. And they were very frequently depicted in buildings. Like it's almost like the way they were depicted was almost to remind like a portal, like people passing those spaces that like they were at the crossroad of that, like that kind of like I want to say the verticality, the moral verticality,
Hmm.
and so like they had. Does that make any sense?
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Huh. Well, yeah, that's crazy. That's so much. So some of what you were saying earlier about like reading. I mean, quite a while back, reading objects and sort of that sort of thing, and how that relates to your interest in tarot, and then how that kind of comes back to talking about how the relationships with imagery that these earlier societies had, and then how that also has to do with differing understandings of what magic is
Hmm.
as well. All of this kind of reminds me of when, I mean, this is not to change the subject too much, but when I guested on your thing talking about Macer's story, uh,
Yes.
the attention that you paid to her art I found really interesting, and the sort of things that you can read into a painting, or and I don't know if it's just her work, um, or if that's a skill of yours that you can kind of apply outward to any given art or object, but that's so interesting because part of her philosophy is this idea of like reading signs in just like the world around us and using that as sort of a divinatory practice. This is all going maybe somewhere towards a question, but yeah, just this idea of like this kind of reading things in the world, reading art for
Yeah.
meaning, and how that kind of ties into
Well, yeah,
divination and tarot.
like I don't know how, and I can do that, but I can do that. Like I do this work with people, which is, like a little too weird, so people don't necessarily do it often. But when I get to get one of those reading, I'm just so super excited. And something that I learned from my own practice, like I've been collecting images for all my life. I just like cut little things. I subscribe to this French art magazine since I'm like 15. I have piles of like stickers and cut out and stuff. And then I just do, I like to just look at them. For me, like it's like a little jewel, like, and sometimes when you have a collection of all of them, you realize that there is trends, that you have patterns. And then I started to read my own patterns in them. And I'm realizing, oh, like, and it was kind of crazy. She's like, oh, like during 2020, I was obsessed with the same type of images all the time, and it was like, oh shit, once you start to accumulate enough, you can read between the lines of things, you can see stuff. And so I do the thing which I try to teach that to people too, but I do the thing where people basically come to me and I ask them to select 10 images. So it can be photographs they've taken, the week before, images that they had an obsession for, and anything, like anything that they feel driven to magnetize by. And then they just send that to me. I put that in a PDF, I print it, and I read it like tarot cards. And it's like you can go like to super deep place doing this.
Yeah.
And I think that this is the thing where, like I was talking about the rationalize, the other one is like just like really, it's the poetic eye, like when I try to describe it to people, it's like, that scene in the Testament of Orpheus where, Jean Cocteau has the, like the painted eyeball, the painted
Yeah.
eyeball. So it's like this eye, his eyes are open, but really they're closed, and he's looking at something else inside. And I think that I can that other eye can see something. I can see something inside people, and then I bring it to the surface like a little pearl, Japanese pearl.
Yeah.
And so, is it magic? Is it psychology? Am I a psychic? Like, is it just, I don't know, like I want to believe I'm a cool priestess and I'm blessed by the God, but, like the reality, I just don't know what it is. And I can't, like the moment that's something I try to explain to people too, is that I know that people have all sorts of different sensibilities. And then a lot of people manage to do that, and sometimes they can't do it because they forgot. But the reality is, like, the moment I feel entitled with that power, and I can't fuck with it, like I can't pretend that I'm like super special, and I think it's just it's like having a sixth toe or something, like a deformity, and. And if it can help people, I'll use it as long as I'm granted this thing, and if I have to just like do something else. But that's something I think it's a matter of sensibility too. I think like for me the real thing that what I read is beauty. I feel I think the beauty it's in the eye of the beholder. But like those drawings that from that woman, they were. Like I could see her own beauty inside. There's something reaching out, and then something, and I know it sounds like wacky to say this, but those drawings, they were living, they were alive to me. Like, and it's just like when we little shop, and then you had like those crazy paintings, like there was something, there was a presence, some image, even if they were printed in a book, like the things when they are. When that beauty is something that you can't extinguish, I don't think what's his name, like Walter Benjamin, like, art at the era of like machine reproduction.
Yeah.
I don't believe that the aura of an image is killed through photograph. I don't believe it because I've had most of the experience. I go to a museum all the time, but sometimes it's going to take me, like from my wish list of painting, I want to go see and face, like it might take me another 20 years if I might not do it, but like I know that painting is alive. And some people, some artists, maybe this is my sensibility. I think some artists are just, like William Blake is one of them.
Sure.
William Blake is like this guy who, floors everyone, even if they are not art amateur, and the people see something, they don't know what they see, but they feel it. And he's like, I think one of the, just on to talk about that flame, like he's, I think one of them. And then there's all sorts of other people that are not necessarily cool or, well, like loved. But when they're like, again, it's a question of sensibility. But some artists, I was like, you go to those places and it's just like the painting, they're like, just come, let us talk to you. Let us talk to you about you,
Yeah, and
Totally.
hearing you talk about, tarot as practice, I kind of like, I'm appreciating like a directness of it, because earlier I was kind of thinking about how the arcana is transposed to like ceremonial magic with the four trumps, right? And the chalice and the sword. But I feel like ceremonial magic, it has this appeal to people because there's so much theater involved. But
Well, yeah, you could wear a cape.
yeah, exactly. And it really, I mean, like there's a great analysis out there of like, the connection between theater and ritual magic of the 20th century. But yeah, tarot is just a deck of cards, and yet there's still something that was so alluring to, Carl Jung, right? And there's like this this archetypal realm that can be transposed, but then it's also kind of just more of a reading of intuition and a divining of the moment. I don't know. I just it's interesting to me. I don't know why. It's just like I was kind of talking to Ben earlier that tarot, like I have an interest in a lot of occult subjects and the UFO pulp thing as well, but I don't know if it's because of overexposure to the imagery of tarot that it hasn't really drawn me in. But then hearing you talk about it, like I have an appreciation for the directness of it and the personal nature of it, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. And so here's a couple of points, like the one thing I want to like open up to is like I come from France and I live in the US and from not for like every stratus, like there is for the past like 15 years, because a lot of internet like gave us access to a lot of actual museum database and actual sources. A lot of people that were tarot, like would have been tarot enthusiasts are now like have access to the actual history. And there is this thing happening now which I think is very interesting, where people want to know what tarot really is as an object, as an history, the cultural history of it, the social history of it, and why we use it now in a very different fashion that it used to be used. And in France, ceremonial magic existed, but not the same way as in England. And so the cultures are very different. And there is a real divide in France, which I think is very funny. There is a real divide in France between tarot, which is seen as this esoteric jewel, which is, like studied in the 19th century and early 20th century by esotericists in order as a book, not as a divination tool necessarily. And then the history of divination, which is done with the tarot, which is done also with all sorts of games that were published in the 19th century, which were not necessarily as, they were considered vulgar. Oh, it's cartomancer work. And so you have this kind of cartomancy tarot highbrow lowbrow divide. Like tarot is for esotericists, usually guys. Like Eliphas Levi is like very funny with a cartomancer because he despises them, so he kind of like just like yeah, those ladies reading cards, like whatever. And then that's true, you have this culture of women reading cards, and also men reading cards back like in the 20th century too, of course. But this idea that esoteric tradition and divination are not necessarily intermingling as well. Like divination is like, the vulgar child. Like if you wanna know your future, it means that, like you're that type. And I think it's a very interesting divide, because I'm historically interested in both. I think that, of course, the history of popular divination is more interesting because it's hidden, and like it exists in traces and we don't have much of it. So it's interesting to kind of try to look for that. But then how can I say this? The tarot is an object, and I think it has, like people have different sensibilities, like one that I don't have is numerology. Like we have like tons of work that is done with mathematics, numbers, divination, even the die stuff, it's real. And of course in the tarot, because the cards are numbered, you can work this way. But this is like, I just can't do that. I just hate math, like I can't do it. Even, astrology is hard for me because of how abstract it is. Like I see those diagrams and I can't relate to them. I want to see gods and goddesses in robes and their story, like the Ovid stories in which they were involved and usually doing mischievous things, And so I think tarot works for people that are image driven and object driven, because it has, like there is an artistic element in working with cards. Like it's a very sensual object. You have to, like you can just, studying them is pleasurable, not like looking at an Excel sheet.
Yeah.
It's pleasurable. I think and we'll talk about the divination aspect of it, but so you're working with pictures that are in the palm of your hand. It's a very sensual thing. You to be able to work with the card, you have to create those spreads, so like those geometric forms that are going to be informed by prompts and so there is a strong visual geometrical element in it, and I think it just pleases a certain type of people. Like there's something where people work this way because there is I don't know, like a sensual aspect in it. I know that at least for me, it's true. Divination is an interesting topic, because I don't know. I don't know if what I'm doing is divination. Like I have feedbacks from people who tell me, oh, you were right, but like the reality is, like people that I told stuff that I was wrong, I don't think they're never writing to me. So like, what does it mean that I'm always right? I don't think, like I think that people, I'll just work in two level here. I think that the way I see the card is that they tell you something that you need to hear. And that's from my own perspective as a client of tarot reading. I got readings where the reader told me, oh, this is not going to happen. And I had to say, in my head, I was like, fuck you, bitch. What do you mean? And of course, I didn't say that.
Yeah.
But the reality is that the cartomancer doesn't really care about being right or wrong. Because to be able to do that work, you have to remove a part of yourself to just let the card, you're the meat puppet of the card, really. And so that the card speaks to you, it speaks through you. You're the channeler of the cards. And so technically it's not about being right or wrong. And so part of the cartomancy work, tarot work, is about saying that needs to be said. And then that's from the person needs to hold this and decide to build their course of action either with or against it. And I've had people telling me, no, you can't do this. And then but that's what I tell people when I read their cards. Like, if you do it out of spite to prove me wrong, we still, both of us win.
Yeah.
So the idea that the message is this kind of golden thread that pushes its authority on people's, like I mean, people work this way sometimes. I don't work this way because I think it's very limiting. I think the tarot is a very freeing tool. It's a tool of healing and liberation. It empowers people. It gives them the, access to something. And again, I don't know if I'm a good diviner, but I know that, people find their way through the message and then they do something with it that matters. It reawakens something.
Yeah, and the appeal to the personal appeal to imagery you mentioned, I have to say, you're an incredible follow on Instagram because like the archival nature of what you're doing, I think is so incredible and speaks to the history of it too, and just so much gorgeous artwork and imagery associated with all of the decks. And I wanted to ask you too, some of the early decks, like how were the cards distributed? They were like in the back of monographs and supposed to be removed. Is that right?
There was I mean, I'm not an expert in that topic necessarily, but like for a very long time, people producing cards had to pay a very specific tax. And for playing card in France, the tax was on the ace of spade, so you had to have a special seal. And so like you can see if you look at, like card games from the 18th century, usually you have the cards like bearing the name of the makers. Usually in the Marseille, it's on the two of pentacle, 2 points, because you have this little ribbon that kind of coils around the card. But sometimes it's in other places, and there is all this like weird traffic too, where like you had people smuggling. Like the cards were made on like 18th century. The cards were made with those like carved wood blocks, and so you would print a large sheet. You had maybe like I don't know, like 36 cards on a big, maybe less. I don't know. My math is bad. Numbers is not forte, but sometimes less cards. And so they will print it. And then sometimes the cards, like some card master will get, like caught and so like they will just basically erase the card. And sometimes someone will recoup the thing and kind of redesign the cards from the erased board. I found it very interesting because it's like the history of card making and the history of reading card is always a dangerous lifestyle. So it's and it's really fascinating. And so in France, like we managed to trace, like the problem with the card is that they're so fragile that you can't really, a lot of it, we only have access to just such a tiny percentage. And so there is this thing that happened, which we saw at the Met, which was fantastic, is that sometimes, like some rare book library will just give some of their leather-bound books to a restorer because they need to change the binding, and the restorer will, kind of crack open the binding, and to kind of like fortify the cover of the book, you'll find layers of playing cards like that were, and so you can somehow they retrieved a bunch of cards through that.
Wow. That's
you
awesome.
you open a drawer somewhere in the countryside, and there is like, oh, here's an 18th century deck. There you have like every year, like that's the funny thing with tarot history is like every year people have those strong theory, and then every year sometimes you have like a new deck that is discovered from like the 17th century. Like recently, a couple of years ago, they found the earliest known today, the earliest Marseille deck that was actually produced in Marseille. It's called a Jacques Bachier. I think it's from like 1636.
Wow.
And it's so pretty. And it's purple, and the colors are crazy. It was sold in an auction for like a gazillion.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because you can kind of piece things together little by little, and the cards are so pretty, right? They are.
Yeah.
Yeah. Huh. Sometimes I just write down these questions that are not really very good questions, but which I think end up getting answered, and then I kind of want to revisit them. So I was thinking, when a tarot reading is happening, who is who is speaking when the cards are being read? Like what voice is that? Where is that coming from? And
It's
I feel, yeah,
it's coming from the cards, like the my
yeah,
job is to look at the cards. And I mean, technically I'm the one speaking, and I'm also the in the work I'm doing, I'm talking with the person as well, and I want them to engage. And so usually the way I work, like I give an appointment for an hour, and we take 10-15 minutes to just talk. I talk with the person and I ask them, I try to dissect what they need from me and how best I can help them. And then I lay the cards, and then the magic starts, like it's just this thing. I don't know. Like it's very funny because I mean I'll talk about this because I think it's funny. So I I work with this French brand of tarot called Ducer, and I help them with their social media, and they ask me to do like readings live on the, like to do videos of readings. It's a very hard exercise for me because if you remove the person element, my work is very hard to do.
Mm.
There is this kind of emulsion between you, the person, and the card. And
mm,
when you do that, like it's just like I don't know, like the answer just fall like a turkey falling already cooked on the tarot table. It's true. It's true. So I just, like I don't know if I'm very articulate. I don't know if I express myself very well either. Like in my daily life. But like the thing is like when I read the card, I just like I don't know where it comes from. It just comes, and it like ugh, it just comes, and it's just like I'm the first one being like wowed by it because like I read cards to people I don't know most of the time. People I just met. Like one of the things that is just so fascinating is like some people are very. I read in person once a month in the city, and most of the work I do it online. And so like like some people ask me those questions, which I think are really legit to ask. You're like, well, how does that work on Zoom? Like with the energy, and I'm just like, I don't know. Like it's energy, I guess. It transcend, like the spatial temporal component. But it works this way too. Like there's something that happened,
mm,
and it's very hard to put in words. Like for me I don't know if it's um I don't think it's a trance state because I'm very aware of what I'm doing and I'm looking at the card. But there is this feeling of like deep dive. And so I just don't know where I deep dive, but I deep dive in that space.
Hmm.
And it's just like that's the place where all the answers are. And are they the answers? I don't know. But like that's where I access that stuff. I don't know. Anatomically
mm.
speaking, I don't know if it's in my stomach or in my left foot. But it's like
Huh. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I always wonder like because I spent a little bit of time reading tarot like but only for myself ever like and I had a pretty consistent practice of it for a few years. And sometimes like the information or whatever you want to call it that would come out was very specific and bizarre and startling. But I don't know if do you read for yourself? Is that like a taboo in tarot or
no, so like it used to be a taboo, and then oh, actually I don't have it here. It's in my library there. Like the story with like reading for yourself used to be kind of drawn with there is a lot of like superstitions, and
yeah,
it's very because I personally I love superstitions. I collect superstitions. I'm like like let me touch this or let me go to that strange church and then do the whole routine where I love it. Like I live for this really. Um, but there this you're not supposed to buy your own deck. You're supposed to get can you imagine like all those tarot readers were also deck collectors, like all their decks.
right.
That's because they bought. Of course, you can't work this way. So the in the 80s, this woman wrote this book, which it's like I think in America you have a lot of some of the most important tarot scholars, and it's really my sensibility. Rachel Pollack was
Yeah.
also as you know a fiction writer.
Yeah, she's great.
She's such a fantastic woman. She was my friend. She passed away unfortunately a couple of years
Oh.
ago.
Hmm.
Last
I'm actually looking at a book of hers right now, just randomly on the shelf. Yeah,
It's like, if that book fall, let me know, because it happened to it happened to me once. It was crazy. She's around. She's around. She's still around. She's still, like, I call upon her sometimes for readings, and she helps out. Like, and it's the experience of a lot of tarot reader studied with her. She's still around in ways that are surprisingly astonishing. But so Rachel Pollack is a very important tarot scholar, and another important one of our tarot elder is Mary Greer. Mary Greer in the 80s wrote this book called Tarot for Yourself, and it's the first book on the subject. Like, basically saying that, yeah, like, you're not supposed to read card for yourself, but here is like a looking at tarot from, like, a more kind of Jungian aspect, in a way that you can basically do this, that will, how can I say that? Well, that will allow you to just understand yourself better, and maybe, like, navigate life in a very different way. And so, like, what she proposed was using tarot for introspective work. And that's what I do. Like, for myself, I can't give myself a reading all the time. Like, I work with a card for me every day, but, like, I usually don't pull more than one card. I journal with them. I use them for my own personal spiritual thing.
Yeah.
But the reality is that, like, you can't give yourself a reading every day. Like, I can't. So, like, what I do now is, and also, like, I'll just say this. A lot of people now, there is this understanding that, like, oh, you have to, you use the card for yourself first. But having intuition, we have so many blind spots about ourselves. Like, being intuitive, you can't be intuitive necessarily when you're like. And so I have, like, there is, I can give you some tips if you feel like you want to read cards for yourself and try to kind of, like, not project the answers you want to see, because we've all done it. I've done it. But I get, like, maybe 2-3 big readings a year from someone, from my same tarot reader. And then sometimes I have, like, I have students, friends who read cards. So when I need, like, I have a question, I will just, we have this kind of deal of reading exchange where, like, they'll call me, I'll give them a reading. I read for my friends all the time. And I'm, like, I'm happy to do that for them, because as long as it's helpful for them, I'll do it. But reading cards and having, like, sometimes the cards are really witty, and they want to kick your ass. And sometimes when you read the card yourself, you don't see that. You want to see something else, because the reality check they're trying to procure is, will just be, like, buried under the fog of, like, oh no, I don't want this. It can't be that.
Right.
So it's just, it's hard to be fair. So my advice is to just go to see someone, and then, like, use the card as prompts, like, use the card symbolically, like, try to look at them and maybe question them, like, something that I do. I didn't invented this, but it's something that I found very interesting to work, is, like, meditating with the card. You just take a card and visualize it and interact with the character. And one of the things that I do with my students, like, you ask them to give you a message. So instead of reading the card, you're doing an active imagination work in which you're gonna meet the personality of the card in a reality that is your imagination. And my experience and the experience of some of my students is just fascinating, because, like, sometimes you imagine the card will behave a certain way, and they don't. Someone told me, like, we were talking about this student of mine, like, a couple of weeks ago, we did that exercise, and she was working with the Queen of Sword, and she's, Queen of Sword in the Rider-Waite-Smith's very cold queen, just very clinical, very sharp, not a talker, sharp talker, wordsmith that is incisive. And then she told me this thing where she was like, she saw it as a Spanish queen, and suddenly there was this kind of, like, authority from like a Latin matriarch that, is not present in the iconography of the card, but that's how she experienced it. And I thought it was just fascinating to me. because it's true, you know, when you interact with the card in a different way, when you try to let them become part of you, you know, a lot of interesting facets of them surface.
Hmm. Um, that's great. Yeah. I mean, what I was doing was usually 2 or 3 cards and kind of thinking about what they might mean for a given day, not really trying to pull anything from them, but more going to them
Mhm.
and seeing where that was. But again, it's been at least 5 years since I've done that intentionally. Um,
Can I ask you a question? It's like, let's reverse the game.
yeah.
What's the craziest reading you gave yourself? I would love to, you know, since you guys are, you know, doing tarot too, I want to hear your experience as well.
It's a good question. Um, I was using, it's also because when I was doing it consistently, it was all kind of bleeding together.
Mhm.
But things that, like if I was in a situation of some kind of interpersonal issues or something, and I just looked at the cards that day, it seemed like when there were moments of heightened emotions or like some sort of like friction in my life, it's when the cards were more blatant or like you were saying, like that they're kind of being mischievous. Like they would seem to have more of like a ironic or like sarcastic cast to them.
Yeah.
And I was using a bunch of different decks at the time too, because I am a collector, and at a certain point, that's what I was buying. So for a while, I was using this deck called Symbolon. Have you heard of
Oh,
that one?
Symbolon. Yeah, the Symbolon.
And it's
Yeah.
not even really a tarot deck, but it's basically a tarot deck. And that one was all of the readings from that one were totally bizarre.
Yeah. I
Um,
I
yeah,
have one in the back over there, I think. I have a Symbolon. I think it was like edited by this German brand, I think from Urania or something. Uh,
yeah,
it's just, but that's the thing too. It's like different decks, different aesthetics, different voice.
yes.
I've been, you know, I used to have that deck and I don't anymore. And then it was gifted to me again. Let me see if I can find the cards. They're all moving around. But this is a funny. I have 2 cards. I think the red. My deck. Oh, here it is. Such a mess of cards. It's such a, you know, I'm a slob in general, but like being a slob and a card reader just sucks because it means your cards are. It has a very funny story, that deck. This is called it's a very, very popular deck in France. It's a system called the Béline Oracle. L'Oracle Béline, you have the box right here. And
Huh.
it has a really funny story, and I'll tell you all. So I'm reading this book right now, and it's the 1959 autobiography of this clairvoyant named Marcel Béline, who was a really famous clairvoyant seer. He was called the Prince of Seer. He used to go, you know, there you can go. I mean, he's French, so you won't understand it. But like, there is like interviews on the French radio online, you know, like from the 60s. It was very famous. He wrote for like the crazy stuff. He wrote for like sports newspapers and for 1 year, and it gave, you know, his prediction, like, oh, like this is going to be the winner of the football. And then he moved from the sports magazine to Ciné Revue, which is this very famous film magazine where you could hear, you know, there is this new film also, like this couple is going to get, you know, this pair of stars is going to get married. And so he had all this like, kind of gossip column about, you know, who's going to divorce and who's going to have babies. And so he was just really, you know, he was like this popular guy. And so his story is really amazing. He was a real humanist. And I have such a great fondness for him. At some point in the late 50s, one of his clients told him, oh, I have like all these like esoteric papers that I found in the house. I don't really know what they are, but I'm sure you'd be interested in them. And so he was like, oh, no, I don't have time for this. And she was like, no, but I think it's really important. You should come and go there. and then otherwise I'm going to burn everything. And so he showed up to the house, and he found all these like incredible papers that were from this 19th century, also famous palm reader and occultist named the Magus Edmond. And Magus Edmond is really great. And so we know that now because all those papers were given to a French museum in Marseille. And so I went to see the collection in December. And so like Magus Edmond created all these notebooks with like palmistry diagrams and astrology wheels. And it's kind of esoteric outsider arts, you know. He created 2 decks, 1 tarot deck, fully hand-drawn, which is super beautiful and crazy looking. And then he created this little deck that is like basically working on the 7 planets with all this insane design. Let me just try, like this is like the card that says, friends, pensée amicale, friendly thoughts. And you have this like super weird dog. And then this is a flower, a pansy, but it's grumpy. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll have to
that's
share
awesome.
that on the
I'll have to show you the bats because there is look at this crazy cat too, like wow.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Trees and
that's
so
crazy.
he found the deck, and look at this. This is my favorite one. This is like theft and loss. So you have this like super cute bat. It's just hard because those are like bad cards, but the
yeah, right.
Yeah,
You kind of want it. Yeah.
And look at Saturn right here, like super goofy with his beard and his togas. This is great. And so like basically Béline was like, okay, I found that he started to research the Magus and Edmond, and basically they republished the deck. And since the 60s, it's been one of the most used deck in France. It's like like people still use it. That deck though, so it's just like I read with it for myself in the morning for fun, and it's just like it's your ass, It's just like
Wow.
no joke, like that cat may be cute, but I had it this week and it was not fun. And
Really?
it's true.
So
Or
it
it's-
doesn't like demystify it at all. Like the imagery doesn't demystify the meaning. Yeah.
And that's the thing, divination, like I don't know if what I do is divination, but like it feels like some decks are just work better than or are more propitious to some type of work. And like this one, the Béline, some oracle decks are just like they're just kind of like clockwork, like it's just and like maybe there is like me being extra sensitive and be like, oh, I got a shitty card, I'm gonna make sure unconsciously I'm gonna have a shitty day too. But yeah, some decks really flavor the type of reading. And there is decks, I don't read with the Thoth deck, for example, because I tried a couple of times. Every time I read with the Thoth deck, although it's visually one of my favorite deck, it just feels like being punched in the gut, punched by the fist of Aleister Crowley and Lady Frida Harris.
Yeah, really. Yeah.
Huh. Yeah, I'm gonna buy one of those.
The Béline,
Yeah, that's fun. Yeah.
I'm gonna go in France. I'll get one for you, and you can I'll send it to you next time I'll be in New York. I'll send it to you.
Hell yeah.
Try it.
I love that art. Yeah, that's up my alley. Let's see. Do you have? We talked a little about like Rachel Pollack, and
Yeah.
maybe that would be your answer. But do you have a favorite kind of? Maybe 2 different answers: a beginner's tarot book, kind of to get into it, and then like one that you think is also like a master class in kind of getting into tarot, like.
Well, yeah. So like I have a couple of things to say about this. The first thing is that my great mistake, I think, as I was like looking, like starting to read cards, is to not remember that people who write books are human beings, and sometimes they are alive and well, and they live next door, and they teach too. So there is a lot of there is a lot of a really, really important teacher. Every teacher is different, and everyone has a different sensibility. It's like the Powerpuff Girl, like the Spice Girl. I like to do intuitive work. I like to use art as an entrance point for tarot, but that's my sensibility. But if you look at the work of Mary Greer, she has a very strong Jungian background, and she's really and she's been doing this since the 60s, literally. So she's, and she's still alive and she still teaches classes. So go and, like just drink her live, like brain. At some point, this is what happened with Rachel, Rachel was my friend, and then from one day to the next, she went to be my friend to history, and I don't have access to her. And she used to be like, she was the funniest person you'd ever met. She was super nice, super generous. She was extremely smart. She was smart in a way which I found, like you read her book, like she made this book which I love called um Walking in the Forest of Souls. It was republished recently by Visor Book, and it's maybe not the best beginner book, but it's such a beautiful book on tarot as a poetic game, and I think, like just reframing tarot like that was just so beautiful. And then she has this really wonderful way of, she was really talking very simply and yet talking about things that were very complex and very minimal, like things, her language was very easy to understand. And I think it takes a lot of mastery. She was an excellent writer. So, but Rachel Pollack, like the classic 78 degrees of wisdom, I think is, like just going through the major and minor arcana of the Rider-Waite-Smith. I think that because it's great and weird and it's Jodorowsky, at some point you have to read The Way of Tarot by Jodorowsky and Marianne Costa, because he has his own vein of writing, which is like semi-autobiographical, magic realist / crazy, and I adore him. I used to live in Paris, so like we used to go with my friend where he read cards at this cafe called Le Téméraire. So we used to attend to his like tarot reading, and it was very strange, and it was fascinating, like he was always flanked with a bunch of like superstars that were kind of learning tarot with him. So like I remember, it's really, but so his book, like he has such a, even if you don't read the Marseille deck, and like I'm not interested in the way he reads the system he put in place, which is very mathematical and not necessarily, it's just like your brain is on a computer. Like the moment you apply this, you're losing the imagination, and the reality is that he is a person of incredible imagination. It doesn't read the card the way he explained that in the book. It just is like completely image-based, intuitive, poetic. And then the way he talks about the card though is just fascinating. And so that just read as a great, tarot book. It's a how do you call that, a style exercise, literary wise.
Yeah.
And for having read a lot of them, like I think that it's good to have a good writer, because otherwise it can be very boring. So Rachel Pollack is a must. Jodorowsky is great. Mary Greer, Tarot for Yourself is like probably like a great entrance point into understanding what tarot can be for you, as like a companion, like a sounding board for things. But then the reality is that if you're interested in tarot, you have to kind of expand and read all sorts of other stuff. Like I'm going to show you this, because since you guys are book people, I'm reading this book. The cover is in French, but I'll talk about it. This is one of the craziest book I've read in a long time. It's called Last Love in Constantinople. It was written by this man called Milorad Pavic, who's a Serbian author.
Yeah.
And it comes with a tarot deck. Because it is basically a novel, slightly, it's based on the Napoleonic War. And it's just a very complicated story, but every chapter is a major arcana. The one of the things that I found brutal and amazing about this book is you can read it in order, or explain you how to give yourself a reading with the cards, and according to what you get, you can read the book according to the reading, with starting with the cards. Basically, you have the Empress, you read the chapter 3, you have the Death card, you read and so it's kind of like choose your own adventure, except that the cards are choosing the adventure you're going to get. And it's such a great piece of experimental writing. And the book is it's just this, like this, yeah, like magic realist fantasy. And it was a really, it's, you were talking about the voice of tarot. Like when I read that book, and I wrote about this recently for Patreon, like the way he uses all these like strange metaphors, and like the characters are, I don't know, it's like a surrealist dream.
Hmm.
That's the way tarot talks. It has this very
Yeah.
strange Lynchian dream logic where sometimes like you believe you're gonna read the end of the sentence a certain way, and then you have this very strange image that come, and still have to work with it. I think that book, The Last Time in Constantinople, is something that when I read this book, I feel like that's the way the card are speaking to me. Kind of
Hmm.
strange, disarticulated images that still make sense.
Well, that looks great. Do you know if it has been translated into English?
It's been translated into English. It was published back in the 90s.
Oh,
And so like I'm reading it with my students. And so you can find copies from the 90s still. And then you can find, also some copies as well. The book is on Amazon on archive.org. So if you want to read it first, for fun. And but yeah, a friend of mine gifted it to me in French, and the French edition is very recent, so they published the card with it.
oh,
That's
nice.
So
awesome.
cool.
Yeah.
It's so cool.
Oh. Um, have you ever read Tarot Symbolism by Robert O'Neill?
Oh, is that the pink book?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah, I read it. I remember I broke the bank to buy that book.
it's expensive. Yeah, I've been
Yeah,
holding on to it just
yeah,
because I was paging through it. I bought it to for the shop
yeah.
because it's an expensive book, but it looks so exhaustive that I kind of just wanted to keep it as a reference. So I pulled it out today, and it seems pretty solid.
Yeah, well, it's just that's the thing, I think if I remember well, he had like this very strong, like he had this very strong, I believe, and please, if people hear this and I'm wrong, please, no offense in here. I'm not pretending to be right ever. But he had this very strong understanding of tarot coming from the Albigeois or the Cathar, like from this kind
Hmm.
of
Yeah,
like
the Gnostic thing is big in
yeah,
here.
the Gnostic.
Interesting.
And
Yeah.
it's so, like this is the thing where I appreciate reading people's speculation about tarot. I don't, like I'm all for it. I like there is, like people have, one of my favorite book that I read within the past 5 years is the Peter Mark Adams Solabuska, The Game of Satyr.
Oh,
I love
yeah.
that book. And I love Peter Mark Adams' work so much, like his Mistai is like completely mind-blowing to me. And then you talk to, like the world of tarot history is like a lot of like pretentious people. Just like, oh yeah, but he's not a serious scholar or whatever.
Hmm.
And I was just like, like that book really, like at least he tried to, like read those images. Nobody ever dared, and his reading is fucking amazing. It's like
Yeah.
what Peter Mark Adams believe is that it's a grim, the Solabuska deck, this Renaissance deck was almost like a grimoire that spoke about some of the darker hours of magic in certain
Hmm.
areas of Italian aristocracy. And I mean,
Hmm.
like am I, like again, I don't want to be an historian. I'm interested in history, but the reality is that um history, like you have to be able to understand the world. You also have to expand your imagination. And then after that, like prove it with facts and cross-reference things. But yeah, I just enjoy a good tarot theory. I
Oh,
found,
yeah.
and that book is fantastic. And you're totally right. It's a very complete, and he's the way he works. It talks about the major arcana. I think it's fabulous.
Yeah, I've been really enjoying looking at it again. And they really like to, on the back, like blurbs, they're really kind of driving home that he's a scientist.
Yeah.
Like he's like he just happens to like tarot. So it's kind of like this weird angle on it.
I mean, it's just that's the thing. Like there is a lot of trope. That's something. So I said, like I don't have the book here because I'm not gonna pick it up. It's in my bedroom, but that Marcel Bellin biography, like he wrote it like he was, I think, like 40-year-old, and he write a biography of himself. And so there is all these tropes about like I'm like a clairvoyant in my prime, and like I have 20 years of experience, and I'm gonna write my memoirs. One person who did this, and are they true or not, which I found really hilarious, is Mademoiselle Lenormand, who was this palm reader slash cartomancer who became very famous during the French Revolution because she was, she apparently predicted, like Napoleon was going to become, the emperor, and she was involved in all sorts of political imbroglio. But like she wrote a series of biographies, autobiographies, and those things are just, they're like mental. She gossips about like all the people that are all the aristocrats that came to her, and there was this obsession for using rational science as a way to give yourself legitimacy and credit. And it's just a thing where like, do we have to operate this way now? Like what I believe I'm doing with the card, I think it's a poetic art form. I believe that that it's almost like, like theater for one, like it very much like you'd read a novel or you watch a film, and that film will blow your mind. And then you'll just get very attached to a character, and then your life is going to be transformed because there is something that you find in that film that becomes a life-saving, force. I believe tarot is that for me and for other people too. It's like this story in which you're the hero. It's about you. The cards make it for you. It has the last thing it has to need. It needs. You can take what's important, leave the rest, and then it doesn't exist anymore. It's ephemeral. So it's between me, the person, the card, in the time being. And then some people, I like and I enjoy recording the readings. I also enjoy not recording my readings when I get readings because I think the memory of it is more interesting. When people record the reading, I tell them, wait a month to re-listen to the reading, and you're going to see that there is a huge gap between what I said and what you heard. And then you can connect the dots. So yeah, it's like, like I don't believe in them. It's like, it's so passé. So you're like, rational stamps, science doesn't work this way so much anymore. Science is so weird now anywhere. It's like, I'm not a physician, but I do listen to some quantum physics radio show from France, and like it's just, it's out there. It's like transcendental for sure.
Huh. Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, they're getting closer together somehow, the poetic and the scientific.
Yeah.
And eventually it'll all be one thing.
Yeah, I know. The snake will bite his own tail, and I will be the Ouroboros of existence. I can't wait.
Yeah. Cool. So yeah, I feel like that might be a good time to cut off the snake's tail of the conversation. It's been great.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, guys.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, if people want to find your information, your book, well, where should they look?
Well, I have a website, LaetitiaCartomancy.com. I have a shop there. I sell cards, my books. I have 2 books, and the tarot book is my last book. I have another book on Jesus, which is not selling as much. It's a cool book though. It's like Jesus in contemporary art and pop culture, and
Wow,
cool.
Interesting. Yeah.
It's a fun. It's not a bestseller at all. But for the book, I interviewed a lot of people who created Jesus imagery, and some of them are very earnest. Some of them are kind of parody or just like. And it was just so fascinating because some of those images we see, some of them are, some of them have been, memed around, and yet when you hear the guy talking about them, they're sacred connection to those images is really, really strong. So it was just about it's. So I'm interested in sacred images and trying to understand what intention charged them with that sacred, like and so like Jesus is, has been a recurring topic in art. So like it's interesting into what's being produced today. So yeah, like they can look at my website. I teach classes all the time on tarot. I read cards all the time. I'm around and I'm alive. So hit me up.
That's good. Yeah. I didn't even know. I must have like Jesus blindness or something. I didn't even see that book when I was looking at your stuff.
Just like yeah, you just kind of like dissociate, like appeared in like some kind of
That's funny. I did see that you have those cool little amulets. Your shop is great. So this is the official Consensus Unreality cosign on checking out that shop. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, so thanks again for coming on, and
you're welcome.
Thank you all for listening.
Yeah, thanks for listening.